Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, July 25th, 2024. For those of you who might be new to our broadcast, every other episode is a live Q&A with our current and alumni clients and family members. So you're welcome to invite. If you're an alumni, you're welcome to attend. You're welcome to invite family and friends to this. This is an opportunity really for us to be able to answer and respond to their questions. You can ask questions for and on behalf of them. If you get a question asked by a family member about any of our programming, any of the issues that we work on, you're welcome to pass those on to me. You can always send in your questions, even if you're not an Evoke client or an alumni client. You can always send in your questions to webinar@evoketherapy.com. Those questions go to the top of the queue. Tonight, we're pretty loaded up with pre-submitted questions. If there are any live audience members that do submit questions this evening, I've instructed Steve, who's moderating for me this evening, to pop those to the top of the queue. Before I begin with my answering questions, I want to talk about the one thing tonight. The one thing I want to talk about tonight for listeners is our therapeutic intensives. We hold therapeutic intensives outside of Park City, Utah, in Midway, Utah. And in these intensives, you really do a deep dive into your work. If you don't know what your work means when I say that, first of all, I've done a broadcast on those. But if you don't know what it is, this is a place to find out what your work is. So it's 7 individuals. We call it Finding You. It's therapy. It's not psychoeducation. And in my opinion, if there is something that you can do for your child, this is the most efficient way to spend your time and your money and your resources. I believe that your attendance and the follow-up that inevitably comes with Finding You, I believe that by going into that process and continuing in that process, I don't think there's anything more valuable you can do for your child, for your marriage for that matter, or for any of your relationships. The relationship that we have with ourselves becomes the template, the pattern for the relationship that we have with everybody. I was thinking about this week that I remember not knowing what I'm telling you, or at least maybe just knowing it theoretically. But now I have lived experience of it, both personally and, of course, watching the people that I've worked with the past 3 decades. So I'm going to be in New York. Actually, that one is completely sold out, July 31st through August 4th. We're going to be doing these remotely more often. We're going to be going to various cities. August 14th through 18th is the next in-person intensive in Midway, Utah. That's going to be run by Emma June, my daughter. So if you want to attend one with her, that is your next opportunity, September 8th, 18th through 22nd after that. We have an online option. It's a wonderful option. We started these during the pandemic, doing them online. Of course, that makes sense. And I was skeptical. I really was. And after doing the first one, I actually ran it with Emma. After doing the first one, I couldn't believe how much we could accomplish with the online format. So we decided to keep them. It's a third of the cost, and it's about half of the time. So you save on travel, you save on lodging. You can do it from the comfort of your own home. August 9th through 11th is that next offering. There is one spot for a couple in the Finding Connection workshop that will be run by myself and my wife this fall, September 25th through 29th. That should be filled in the next 7 days or so. So if you're interested in that, the Finding Connection workshop really is finding you as its basis, and then how that translates to the couple's relationship. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about this evening. So with that, I am going to take my first pre-submitted question. Somebody says, what does it mean when you share the quote by Jung, the unlived life of a parent is the greatest burden for a child to bear? I shared that recently and had a couple of people ask me this, so I brought that question from there to this. Carl Jung said some version of that the greatest burden that a child can bear is the unlived life of a parent. And what that refers to, if you don't take care of yourself, you will inevitably steal from your child support. This is not an absolute where we all get it perfect. This is one of those things that I used to teach many years ago, 2 decades ago. I would talk about the same concept. And I think I thought I was a lot better at it than I think I am today. And that's not because I've gotten worse at it. That's because I've become more aware. And isn't that a great paradox? One of the experiences that I've had in psychotherapy is that I become more and more aware of my issues. And then part of that comes as I develop self-compassion. So back to the question, if you don't take care of yourself, you will steal from your children. You'll ask for them to fill your emotional needs, your sense of meaning. And again, another paradox, as most of the principles we talk about are, because of course my children, my 4 children, are the individuals on earth that I commit my most of my energy, most of my care, most of my love to. Their happiness and well-being weighs on my heart as much as anybody, along with my wife, but I would say even more because I feel a certain stewardship and responsibility for my children. It weighs especially heavy on me. But like they talk about in the pre-flight video, you have to secure your own mask. I was recently talking to a parent that I've been working with for many years, and after her describing to me several of the stressors that she was dealing with their child, and some of her own stresses, I said to her, you know what I'm going to encourage you to do after all this? You know what I'm going to say? And I was happy to hear her say, you're going to tell me that I need to take care of myself. And my answer was, absolutely. It's really critical that you take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, my wife says it this way in a kind of a humorous way. She says that when you show up starving to somebody else, in a relationship, when you show up starving, malnourished emotionally, psychologically, you'll end up eating the other person. Part of our ability, I talk about this all the time. If you can imagine, and pick your favorite mystic or a hero. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Allah, God, Jehovah, Jesus, Moses, Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Martin Luther, Martin Luther King. I don't care who it is. Mother Teresa. Pick your hero. And the one thing that they do well is they take care of themselves. And the reason why it's so important for me to tell you that is because I think we think that the goal is to be this kind of good, compassionate, clear-headed, grounded, boundaried, and assertive person. I think we think that's the goal. And yes, that is what comes out of the work. But the work is, and I talked about it the other night at length, the work is to do battle with our own shame, our own guilt, the programming of our childhood so that we can take care of ourselves. We have to get past that idea that self-care is selfish. When people ask me about self-care, when I enter dialogues about self-care, there's all kinds of ideas about self-care. But the one thing that I find that is consistent in the self-care dynamic and process is that it causes guilt because you are for some time putting yourself first over others. And we have been taught, the vast majority of us have been taught that to care for ourselves when somebody that we care about, that we love, is in need is selfish, is not okay. So self-care for me is saying no. Self-care for me is letting people down. Self-care for me is not extending myself beyond what my body can take. I have this idea that I share with clients sometimes that I think is humorous and probably not going to give me an endorsement from a fast food company anytime soon. But when I have a McDonald's day, McDonald's is my guilty pleasure. McDonald's is the most gluttonous guilty pleasure that I have. I love it, and I know that might sound strange to some of you, or some of you can relate to that. But when at the end of the day, or any given day for that matter, I find myself in the McDonald's line, drive-through line, it always reminds me that I might not be taking care of myself well enough. I might not be, as my son once told me, Dad, you have to set up the game to win, not to lose. You have to be able to take care of yourself, because if you don't, you'll end up doing something harmful to yourself or to others. So what Jung is talking about is that if you don't find your own mission, if you don't find your own happiness, if you don't find your own peace, your own purpose, if that isn't an important or critical part or a significant part of your life, you will make your children that, and they will feel an unconscious and maybe even conscious obligation to take care of you, and in the process sacrifice their authentic self, their real self, who they really are, their needs, their feelings, um, whatever's going on for them. I shared the other night that my own mother did the best she could raising 3 boys, being a single mother without support from my father. She did the best that she could, but because she was constantly drained and overwhelmed by that process, my needs were often shamed by her. Not overtly. Sometimes they were shamed overtly. But she was exhausted. She would sigh. She would tell me that I was being dramatic or that I was being too sensitive. I mean, think about that. That's my greatest gift, my sensitivity. That's what makes me good at what I do professionally. That's the thing that really that my children and my wife most treasure in me is my sensitivity. But because my needs, I could sense, I could feel, I could watch my mother's reaction, because my needs and my feelings overwhelmed my mother, and she has since in her late life, independent of me and what I teach, she has said this to me, that you were too big for me. I didn't know what to do with you. And essentially it wasn't your fault. But because my needs exhausted her, exasperated her, upset her, overwhelmed her, I learned as a child to not need. I learned as a child to cover that up, to not feel. And of course, that process of stuffing feelings and blocking my own needs, that comes at an extraordinary cost. Right? I pay for it in overeating and drinking too much in my life and doing drugs when I was younger. I pay for that. So I have to take care of myself. I get asked the question like, what's too much? What's too much selfishness? Or another way that question gets asked, oftentimes in relationships, maybe in a couple, where somebody says, I don't want to be a doormat, or maybe it's with a child. I don't want to be a doormat, right? I don't want to be too self-sacrificing, but at the same time, I don't want to be too rigid. I don't want to be a jerk. And they'll ask me in therapy or in dialogue, they'll ask me, what's too much, what's too little? And my answer is, it's the right question, but I can't answer it. You're really asking the question, who am I? That's the same question. And you get to decide. Nobody else does. And believe me, people will give you your opinions. If you start to get better at boundaries, the people around you will tell you you're doing a very bad thing. They will tell you to stop. Harriet Lerner, one of my favorite writers in self-help, says, look or wait for the change back message. Right? That anytime somebody in a system starts to grow beyond the system, there is what they call a homeostatic energy, an energy that brings things back to homeostasis, back to the way things were. There is an energy in family that tries to pull people back to the way that they were. That is inevitable. It is virtually unescapable. I've had so many people come to me over the years, parents and individuals and couples, and say, I'm trying to set good boundaries, but my spouse or my children are telling me that I'm being crazy or selfish or ridiculous. And my response is, people around you very rarely will celebrate and cheer you on as you set clear boundaries, especially, particularly when those boundaries are in relationship to them. So the work is finding you. The work is figuring out what you need. Relationships require sacrifice and compromise for sure. That is, in essence, what makes a relationship. But you get to decide how much is too much. Or, in the case of your partner or your child, how much on their part is too little. You get to decide, and for yourself, in terms of how you feel about it, how you think about it, and the decisions you make. Nobody else gets to decide. I think it was Ben Franklin who said, it could have been anybody, I'm sure many people have said this, you need to figure out who you are. If you don't figure it out, the world will tell you. In essence, the goal in psychotherapy, the goal in this journey is to become who you are, to become you. And so answers to these questions are synonymous. Answers to these questions are parallel. You have to find yourself. You have to figure that, and you have to experiment, and you're going to make mistakes along the way. But back to the question, what Carl Jung meant when he said the unlived life of a parent who doesn't fundamentally prioritize taking care of themselves, knowing that there's compromise and sacrifice, especially in the role of a parent. But when it gets out of balance, when it becomes too far, when all of your emotional eggs, if you will, are in the basket of your children, it becomes an incredible burden to the child. Children need to know that we are capable of taking care of ourselves, that they need to know that we're responsible for our happiness, for our meaning, for our serenity. Now, children in specific circumstances, when you start to assert yourself, like I mentioned earlier, when you start to get more boundaried, when you start to become more conscious, more aware, more enlightened, they will ask you to change back also. But deeply, fundamentally, children do better when parents demonstrate healthy self-care. And you know what you're modeling for your child? You're modeling for your child how to take care of themselves so that they don't end up in toxic relationships that are abusive or too self-sacrificing. So they don't end up in careers which cause overwhelming stress and disease and heart disease and alcoholism, eating disorders, depression. You're modeling for your children that it's okay to take care of yourself. It's a work in progress. It will last the rest of your life. But this is the project that Carl Jung is alluding to. You have to take care of yourself. And if you don't, you will unconsciously abdicate that responsibility onto the child. And the child suffers phenomenally under that burden, under that weight. Somebody says, my kiddo is entering week 5 at Evoke and is resisting hard, coming up with many unique diversions to resist progress. Can you speak to the process patterns in the wilderness? Yeah, I could spend the rest of the hour. I'll try not to. I'll try to spend 5 or 10 minutes speaking to it. That sounds like good therapy. That sounds like real therapy. I remember one time I had a twin, and my partner, one of the other therapists, also had the other twin at the same time. They were both involved in the same thing, and they both came to us. And I got the oppositional twin. I got the one who was resistant, who was defiant, who was outspoken, and my partner got the good one, the one that was compliant. There's many ways to cope with childhood and kind of what I call escape childhood, get through childhood with. And those are 2 archetypal ways, 2 general ways that people get through childhood, is being the good one or being the rebel. I got the rebel, he got the good one. And at one point we switched during the process just to kind of experiment with it. But what I found was, and what I found that time, what I found many times since, is rebels are easier. Defiant and resistant clients are easier. It's more honest. The ones that are cooperative, especially in the first 4 or 5 weeks, oftentimes you don't get to the root of it. So for me, that's how I would have responded to wilderness therapy. I would have responded resistantly. I did respond resistantly when I went to treatment. And in a way, I communicated more honestly how I felt about the matter. I didn't fake good. I didn't swallow everything they were saying whole or try to please them. So resistance is, I've talked about this before. See, resistance in therapy is not something that we get past to get to the real issue, to get to the therapy. Resistance is the therapy. Resistance is how shame comes up in therapy. Resistance is how anger and hurt comes up in therapy. Resistance is how trauma comes up in therapy. So I would say that that's one common presentation that children struggle throughout. But I wouldn't say that that's a more negative or less optimistic profile or trajectory for a child. Most of my children that were resistant, by far the vast majority, nearing on that high 98, 90, 97%, most of them did very well, both by the end of the program and in life. When I left my program as a teenager, I left defiantly. I left promising that I was still going to use drugs and alcohol. And the irony is I didn't when I got home. but I didn't want to feel controlled. And I took my distrust, my hurt, and my anger from my parents, and I I transferred it on to the therapeutic staff at the program that I was at. So it's not a bad thing. It's a part of the process. It's honest. I would rather have them be resistant here than do well here and then go to the next setting, whether that be home or a school or a program, and then have the resistance rise up there and have everybody think, well, wilderness was so magical that they did so well. Sometimes we do talk about how ideal and wonderful wilderness is in that way. Nature-based therapy is in that way. But it's normal. It's typical. In the most extreme cases of resistance, I would often have parents write a letter that sounds like something like I would have them write and say, I realize you may not change. And I'm sure you have good reasons. So I'm just going to work on myself. I would give that assignment every now and again. Probably that assignment came up 2-3 times a year in the most resistant cases that I dealt with. And it was twofold for me. It had two benefits for me. Number one, it signaled overtly, verbally, that the parent was letting go. It was like an exercise in letting go of trying to control the child. I liked that benefit. I liked that outcome. But the second thing that it also did is it invited the parent to let go of the change. And again, I'm using the word paradox a lot tonight, but it is a paradox. That when you become boundaried, and having your child in the program is boundaried, when you become clear and stay grounded, but you ultimately surrender to the idea that you can't control them and you can't change them, that is the ideal context, the ideal psychological environment for the child. So I'm not asking you to write that letter. You should talk. I want you to talk to your nature-based therapist, your child's therapist, about that. But I will say that it's a good exercise to think about. It is an exercise in letting go. People always ask about letting go, and they interpret letting go as passivity, as inaction. Letting go is not passivity and not inaction. Letting go is courageous and active. Letting go, my favorite example of letting go is telling the truth. Why do we lie? Why do we avoid telling the truth? We do it to control what other people think and feel, or what they do. We do it to control other people, perceptions about us, reactions, decisions, feelings. We do it to control people. When you tell the truth, you're letting go of control. And I'm not talking about being abrasive or hitting somebody over the head with something. I'm talking about telling the honest, courageous truth in a clear and compassionate way. That's letting go. And so this exercise might be one in letting go. Your child knows that you want them to change. They know that. And when you acknowledge the reality, it's not some kind of strange idea or construct. When you acknowledge the reality that ultimately you cannot control their choices, you're setting yourself in the ideal parental position. And it doesn't mean that you don't set boundaries or hold the limit or for example, send them to evoke. Doesn't mean that you don't do that. It just means that you're doing you're completing, exercising this spiritual principle of letting go while still being courageous and doing the best you can. It's like throwing a baseball or hitting a tennis ball with a tennis racket. If you aim it, you'll lose your accuracy. If you know what I mean. If you try to steer it, you'll lose your accuracy. And even if you're not a baseball player or a tennis player, you kind of know what I'm talking about. That's what art is one of the great areas where we learn this. You have to let go. To create a masterpiece, you have to face your fear of controlling what other people are going to think and feel about it. All great art is made in the absence of fear, or at least through the fear. dealing with the fear and walking through it. So it's normal. It's typical. The process of letting go. There often is an arc where clients that begin and persist in resistance will wake up later, but I prefer that much more over clients that demonstrate what therapists call flight to health. The I'm going to be good. That's short-lived, and we eventually have to get to this place that your child seems to already be at. Thanks for the question. Somebody writes, when you encourage parents or partners to listen and contain, that's the psychoanalytic word for listening without reacting. When you encourage parents or partners to listen and contain, when is it appropriate to confront the person on their distortions and the factual inaccuracies of their complaints? Such a difficult and important question. I will tell you this. One of the principles that my therapist taught me many years ago is that principle of strike while the iron is cold. See, when the nervous system is dysregulated, when it's on heightened alert, when it senses threat, when I don't feel safe, my nervous system then is unable to process new information, to take in new information, to respond or accept feedback, to hear my distortions confronted, or my perceptions of reality be corrected. It doesn't work that way. So the fact of the matter is, you have to feel safe first. So my answer is, most of this is about nervous systems, you guys. If someone doesn't feel safe, if somebody's upregulated, dysregulated, on alert, if someone's prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that is creative, that is open, that can listen, that can interpret complex, abstract principles and ideas, if that part of the brain is offline, doesn't matter what you say or how you say it, doesn't work. The bottom part of our brain, the limbic system, is the one that's the primitive brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain. It's the oldest part of our brain, both historically and also literally. It's the part that develops first. It monitors breath. It monitors all of our nervous, all of our functioning of our body that we don't have to think about, our breathing, our heartbeat, and so forth. It also responds to threat. Right? If I see a snake, I jump out of the way. If I see something rushing toward me, I try to, I blink. And so when your limbic system is activated, when you're feeling threatened, all the stuff on top is offline. Daniel Siegel, the great renowned psychiatrist, says it is as if your nervous system is flipping your lid, and he shows it visibly by his hand kind of floating up in the air. So my answer to the question is, you listen first. You wait. What I know is when the nervous system is upregulated, dysregulated, it won't work. It doesn't mean that you're not. It's just you have to be the container. That's where that word comes from. You have to hold space. Somebody's upset with you, somebody's hurt, you listen. And yes, they might be irrational, but that's why it's difficult. If they were rational, if it wasn't based on feelings, everybody would listen. Everybody would listen. It's called containing. It's called deep listening or reflective listening because it is difficult. It takes effort. It's maybe the hardest thing to do in a relationship is to listen. Because what happens is when somebody's upset with us, we're feeling threatened. Right? If somebody's upset at me, frustrated with me, if my work is undone or I'm just traumatized or triggered in that moment, I'm going to become reactive. And then you're both just two limbic systems fighting it out. You're just two primitive animals fighting it out for survival at that point. So you wait till the iron is cold. You wait till another moment. Sometimes, I wrote in the Journey of the Rogue Parent, sometimes it can be a minute later. Sometimes it can be seconds later. Sometimes it takes hours. Sometimes it takes days or longer to kind of challenge people's perceptions or distortions. Even the word challenge, it suggests us a kind of threatening behavior. So maybe better to say that it takes time for people to be open to considering new options, new concepts and new ideas. And you learn how to do this, but as you get bigger, by the way, back to the first question, as you take better care of yourself, you can hold more. The real task in psychotherapy for therapists at Evoke and hopefully everywhere in the world is listening. That's the goal. That's the secret sauce. See, most people don't know what therapy looks like because they think it looks like teaching. And while there is teaching that goes on in therapy, the magic potion of therapy is listening. That's why at the end of a day, seeing 4, 5, 6 clients, I'm exhausted. At the end of an intensive day, after holding all of the trauma, I need to rest. In our family, because everybody in my family, there are 4 people in my family who participate as facilitators in the Finding You process. We all know when that person comes over at night what they need, and they need space. They need they need decisions to be made by other people. They need space. They need to be held. They need grace. Because when you sit in psychotherapy, you're doing something that very few people do, which is you're listening to understand. And if feelings and ideas are being confronted at you, mom, dad, husband, wife, partner, friend, therapist, if those things are being directed at you, it requires capacity. I can't say it any clearer than that. It requires capacity. Both capacity in the moment that we would call state capacity, right? The state of mind that you're in. Are you fed? Are you rested? Are you stressed? What's been your activity the last few hours? Where are you at right now? That's kind of the state you're in. But it also develops, it requires trait capacity. Have you developed a bigger sense of yourself? And I will tell you this now, I am a better listener today than I was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I'm better at it now. Because of the work that I've done to work on myself, to love my horrible, rotten self, to come to terms with my imperfections, with my fallibilities and faults. Today, July 2024, you can say a lot of things to me that you couldn't have said when I was in my 30s. It's a fact. No doubt about it. I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I thought you were just wrong. At the time, I would just carefully and skillfully turn the subject around so it was about you. Because I didn't want to own my capacity. That was too threatening. I didn't want to own my own sense of insecurity in the moment. It was too threatening. So I had somebody tell me in my late 30s, an employee that I valued, that I cared about as a person and as an employee. She gave me some feedback. And as the discussion progressed, she said to me, Brad, I often will come to you with feedback. And by the end of the discussion, it's about me. And I remember at the time being confused because I didn't even know that I thought it was about her. Part of it was, well, it's about you. And part of it was I was unconscious. That was the biggest crime. I was unconscious. And underneath that, I needed to be good. I needed to be good, you see. I didn't know that the goal of life was to be whole. I thought the goal of life was to be good. That's what most people are taught. The epigraph in the Audacity to Be You says, and I quote, why were each of us taught the notion of being correct when the very notion ensured our failure in the world? Most people are teaching their children to be good. We think that that's the goal. I think most people even listening to this think, well, of course, yeah, that's the deal. Be a good citizen, be a good sibling, be a good friend, be a good child, be a good whatever, partner, spouse. In reality, the goal is to be whole, to be who you are. Because when you are who you are, You can own your stuff. When someone says you're a nincompoop, your response is, you have no idea. You've only touched the tip of the iceberg of my nincompoopness, if you will. And if somebody calls you a nincompoop and you're not a nincompoop and you know yourself well enough to know that, there's no trigger. There's no reaction. There's no defense. So the work is to know yourself. The work is to be aware. The work is to be who you are, not to be good, not to be right. And it takes a lifetime and you'll never finish. So the answer to the question is, when is it time to challenge? Later. Not while the iron is hot. Not while the person is dysregulated. Not while the person is feeling threatened or inadequate and they're covering it up with anger and blame and rage and frustration. I'll end with this. Many years ago, we hired a very smart young clinical psychologist. And as I was training him, I was in charge of training him. As I was training him about this method, which is really attachment-based therapy, which is really therapy, actually. As I was training him in this model, he, like many people before and many people after, said to me, "But Brad, we are paid as therapists, and here at Evoke, we are paid to facilitate change. So I owe it to the client and to their parents to move the child along, to help them to change." And my response was, I know what we're paid to do, and this is how you do it. This is what it looks like to do therapy. I started off answering this question to say that most people don't know what therapy looks like because they've never seen it before. And that even goes for most therapists, actually. Not all of them by any means, but many therapists don't know what it looks like. They think it's about confrontation, challenging people, kicking them in the pants. They think it's about moving them along and improving them. They don't know it's about healing and providing them a reparative experience, because we are different than the big people were when they were growing up. They don't know that. Therapy is mostly about listening, mostly about compassion, mostly about love, understanding. So that is the medicine. And then that other stuff, half the time, they'll do it on their own. When I tell my wife I'm frustrated, I'm angry at her, and she listens well and she empathizes, I've already got the answer in my head. I'm smart enough to see the lay of the land and figure it out. But I'm upset. I'm hurt. So, great question. Thank you. Somebody writes this: I struggle to understand where the end of helping a struggling young adult age 22 to 23 lies. My son spent 4 months at Evoke, 2 years at a therapeutic boarding school, and a year at home, where he reverted to old problems, and is now in a program in Utah for up to 6 months. He does not want to take medication and easily falls back into alcohol and drug abuse. What is my role moving forward? I participate in many different ways, including Al-Anon, which is the most important component of self-care. It'd be helpful if you could discuss how our role changes when dealing with struggling adult children. I've listened to many of your podcasts and expect that you tell me that whatever decision I make, it will be a good one. However, I am asking about a technical issue like supporting housing and insurance. What are therapy programs that you would recommend for young adult kids? We can leave him on the street or continue to help him in some minimal way. You predicted closely what I would say. I wouldn't say any decision you make is the good one. I would say any decision you make is okay. It's yours. I know you're asking for very specific detail, and I will tell you that our role in supporting our children typically diminishes over time. You know, it reminds me of the question I was asked by a psychologist once when I was presenting on codependency at a professional conference. And she raised her hand after I was several I was far along through the presentation. And she said to me, Brad, how can you imply or suggest to us, she said, how can you suggest to us that we recommend to our families, to the parents that we work with, to kick their children out of the house when they could end up homeless on the street or even dead? And my response was, first of all, I'm sorry. If I suggested that or even implied it, I apologize. I would never recommend to a parent. I would never recommend to a parent what they should do in these situations. The stakes are too great. And it sounds like in your case, the stakes are great. And it is, in fact, I haven't said this as of late, but it's true. It is in every therapeutic code, ethical code, that therapists are not to give advice when it comes to major life decisions. That is part of our ethical code that we have to sign on to and that we get held accountable for. And that if we don't follow, we can lose our license, our ability to practice therapy. So it's not just some tangential idea of mine not to give advice about this. It is fundamental to the relationship and therapy. So I can't tell you what to do. What I can say is, and it's not even the same with every person, right? Sometimes I deal with parents with children who are disabled. They might have significant learning difficulties or overwhelming ADHD or executive functioning issues, or they might have autism or be on the autism spectrum. There are a host of issues that are, see why the question becomes so difficult to answer generically? Even if I were inclined to give you advice, see how impossible it would be to answer that question generically? There's no one right way. There's just your way, and you get to decide. And if you were my client, I would support you every week, and I would ask you, why do you want to do that? If you're doing it from guilt, I would say, well, I'm not sure you can ever make up for your mistakes. I'm not sure that's even the right thing to do or the way to do it. So if you're doing it from guilt, I would encourage you to reconsider. I would ask you, are you doing it to try to control or guarantee an outcome? And if your answer was yes, I would encourage you to reconsider, to come to terms with the fact that you can't control or save them. That's not your role, and that's not even what's good for them. If you did it out of anger or to punish, we would go through the list of why. It's not what you do, it's why you do it. That's why doing your own work is so important. Not because it's going to give you the answers, not because it's going to give you the answer to the questions that you're asking, but because it's going to answer the most important, really the only question there is to answer, which is, who are you? And the related questions of who's your child and what's your relationship to their diagnoses. I have 4 different children, and I give them 4 different levels of support. So even within my own family, my answer doesn't remain the same. I don't give the same support to somebody when they're 21 that I do when they're 26. At one point, I made a decision to stop supporting my children in their graduate studies. I paid for undergraduate and most of graduate school, nearly all of graduate school, because they kept going. And at some point I say, for my own life, for my own retirement, for my wife and I, for our quality of living, we have to draw a line. And that was for us, not for them. And so if somebody makes a decision to take care of themselves as a parent, I'll hardly ever argue with that. At some point, it's really important to radically accept who you are and who everybody else is. To come to terms with the reality of, it's not your job to live their life. They have to figure it out. And at the same time, there can be variables, circumstances, characteristics, challenges, traumas that would change the equation for you. But there is no generic solution to that. There is no simple matrix that you can kind of look at. It's a process. For those of you that don't know, and if you do know her, you'll find out about this soon. I just before this broadcast, I found out that my daughter, my oldest daughter, is her dog that she loves as much as someone would love a child, is not going to live throughout the weekend, not going to live maybe not live even to the weekend. And I can't think of anything that would be more heart-wrenching to my daughter than that. And I was just on the phone with her a handful of minutes before I started this broadcast. Why am I telling you this? I said to her, she said, we could do this surgery. It'd be very expensive, but it might be, there's only a small percentage that it will even save her life in a significant way where she's pain-free. And at some point I said to her, you're going to have to accept her mortality. It might be now, it might be in 6 months, it might be in 2 years. But at some point you have to come to terms with life, with what is. And that is perhaps the most difficult thing that is asked of any of us. You can only do what you can do. And part of the equation is when I put my last dog down, we had a very similar scenario. I think this is very common. They present you with a complex medical issue in question, and they say you can do this surgery. It'll cost $10,000, and the odds are XYZ about how it's going to turn out. And I decided to let him go. And it was one of the most painful experiences of my life. In my life, I was absolutely heartbroken, overwhelmed with grief in the immediate moment, when it happened, and in the days that followed. I had a greater appreciation, even though I've lost pets before. This was my first dog that was mine, that I loved. And I said to my daughter, I don't regret the decision to put him to sleep instead of try all of the expensive surgeries and with the slimmest of outcomes. If I didn't say goodbye to him that day, at best it might have been 6 months or a year later. And so life is non-negotiable in some ways, in some of these ways. And I don't want to compare dogs to children. I have both, and they're different, but there's similarities here in terms of what we have to come to terms with, what we have to accept. It was my daughter Emma who told me at one point that so much of what she sees in therapy, and you wouldn't think it on the surface, so much of what she sees in therapy is unprocessed grief. We think we can hold on to life. We think we can control it. We think we can prevent even death. And I'm not saying we just lay passively and do nothing, but ultimately, spiritually, we have to come to terms with life. And it's impossibly difficult. And we need support and love and connection to do that. It's inevitable. We have to keep going if we are to survive. We don't have to do it alone, but we have to keep going and accept it. So back to the question, I don't know any programs. I wouldn't recommend any programs anyway over this format. So I don't know. But I will tell you, you get to decide. I support you. Go to therapy, figure out what your relationship is to your child, what it means to be in relationship to another person. I love the quote that says we should love somebody in such a way that they feel free. I think about that all the time. And I don't think us parents are very good at that. I don't think we know how to let go and to still remain connected. I don't think we're well trained in how to love and separate at the same time and to let go. So I'm with you. Father to parent, person to person, it's difficult. And you get to decide. And the work that you do will give you your answer. Back to the psychologist, what I said to her at the end was, I would not tell a parent what to do. I would help that parent heal their codependency. That is their childhood wounds about relationships, the way that they view relationships. I would help them heal that. and then they would make the decision that's right for them. That's the work. That is the work. That is the outcome of Al-Anon and psychotherapy. We don't get rescued from the pain of it all. In fact, we get, in a way, pushed into the pain of it all. But we have a kind of clarity and certainty and groundedness and serenity, even in the midst of terrible pain and grief. We have that so that we can do it. We can do what needs to be done. We want the right answer. We want the guarantees. We want the expert or the guru on the top of the mountain to tell us what to do. We do want that. But unfortunately, if you reach the top of the mountain and meet with the guru, you'll know if they're a real guru if they don't give you the answer. If they just ask you questions, ask you to look at yourself, look into your heart, look into what gets in the way of you seeing your heart and knowing your truth. That's the work. All right, I think that's all the questions I have for this evening. We'll save the rest for the next broadcast. Thanks for those, folks. We have recently partnered with Other Parents Like Me. Other Parents Like Me is a parent-to-parent support program. It provides more than 17 weekly Zoom meetings designed for caregivers of teens and young adults facing mental health challenges, led by trained peer parent facilitators. So it's a little bit different than Al-Anon and the support groups we talk about, and it's a little bit different than psychotherapy. And recently we have struck an agreement with them where all of our current families can be enrolled in Other Parents Like Me for a free year subscription. So email admissions@evoketherapy.com to find out more about that, but that is our new agreement. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Use the QR code, go to Amazon, or just do a Google search for Brad Reedy books, Brad Reedy, Journey of the Heroic Parent, or Audacity to Be You. Like I mentioned earlier, we have our Finding You Intensive and our Finding Connection Intensives coming up, also the online version. You can also have a custom Finding Connection for a couple or a co-parenting system, or Finding Families for families. Just go to our website, use the QR code, or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. All of our current and alumni families are invited to our weekly support groups for our nature-based therapy program, formerly called Wilderness Therapy Program. August 1st, well, actually, there's one tonight at 7 p.m., so in 6 minutes. You can tap into that right now if you want to. Exit here. That's for our current and alumni families. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting for people that are a little bit farther along in the journey. August 19th at 6 p.m. is that offering. We also have an intensives and coaching support group once a month. August 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that next offering. If you want more, go to our website, use the QR code here, or email supportgroups@evoketherapy.com. If you want to work with a coach virtually, if you're comfortable with that, they can work on boundaries, communication, attachment, codependency, subacute trauma, couples and intimacy issues. The list goes on. If you have a child transitioning home, if you have a child in treatment, you can contact our coaching@evoketherapy.com, email us at coaching@evoketherapy.com, and we can match you up with one of our coaches who can do virtual work with you wherever you are in the world. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to your favorite podcast app and search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. Like us and subscribe there, and every new episode, you'll be alerted when it drops. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen to us there. You can find all of these broadcasts, rebroadcasts, archived and saved on Evoke's YouTube channel. So if you want to watch the video version of it with the slides and my face on video, go to Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy Intensives, and on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. My next broadcast, I'm going to be out of town next week doing the New York Intensive. I'll be in New York all week, so I won't be back until August 6th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, where I'll be talking about nature-based therapy, wilderness therapy. So August 6th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. You can always email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com to submit questions, make suggestions, request topics, or to request copies of slides. If I'm using slides with quotes on them and you want to have those, we're happy to send those slides to us. As always, I hope this has been a valuable point of contact in your week. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to these, listening, watching, and doing your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you August 6th. Take care. Bye-bye.